We are live. Welcome back to the channel. This is the Action Figure Grader. And as I alluded to in my Thursday video on the vintage collection, I have managed to snag Shawn from Reserved Investments on YouTube. Shawn is an expert in the collectibles space and collectibles and antique space. And I think that he will provide a nice kind of reality check for maybe some collectors out there who view their collections, their collection rooms as a 401k and some of the risks associated with that. And so before we dig in any further, I want to say welcome. Thank you, Shawn, for joining me tonight.
Anytime. Thank you for having me. This is a true pleasure.
Oh, it's a real pleasure for me as well. And as I talked to you offline about, I sent Shawn an email. And I was like, he's never going to respond. The guy's too busy. But lo and behold, he did, and he agreed to come on. So I really appreciate you doing that. Let's dig in first. Maybe let's go kind of big picture and talk more about your background, your career, and then your YouTube channel.
Sure, absolutely. Well, my full name is Shawn Cermak. I grew up in the Boyertown, Pennsylvania area, which is about 50 minutes away from Philadelphia. Growing up, I entered the antiques and collectibles trade at the age of 12, just because the area that I'm in allowed for a lot of flea markets, yard sales, the whole shebang. So I would go to flea markets every pretty much weekend, and I would interact with a lot of high-profile dealers that pretty much taught me the ins and outs as to how these markets work, what to watch out for. So pretty much from the age of 12 all the way up through 2021, I did nothing but learn about the entire antiques and collectibles trade. And it wasn't just an education on what's valuable, how to identify certain antiques and collectibles. It was also how these markets work, the finance aspect. And I was really obsessed with not only learning about these objects, not only learning about the treasures that we all love and hold dear, but also how these markets work, what makes them tick, how they operate over the short term versus over the long term, how the antiques trade differs from that of the collectibles trade, how markets enter speculative euphorias, how markets die out, what happens as collectors age, how they view their holdings, how they view their collectibles, and how the market reacts to that, because certain collectibles obviously age better than others. Younger generations are interested in different stuff than older collectors. So all this has a tremendous impact on the market for how we view these objects over the long term. And what happened was, when I got knee deep into this and realized I had all this knowledge, I also got a degree in business, economics, finance. I got the business administration degree, as we call it. And I started to apply all these techniques that I've learned, not only from finance, but also the antiques and collectibles trade. And I realized that, just as luck would have it, I'm a couple of steps ahead from the average Timmy. So I was able to make a substantial amount of money in these markets early on. It also helped tremendously that in 1995, eBay came on the scene. And I was already knee deep in the trade. I was in high school. I graduated high school in 1995. I'm a lot older than I look. I'll be 48 years of age the end of this year.
Hey, I'm the same age. So I'm right there with you. So you were doing eBay and everything in '95 when I was too busy chasing skirts, and so from there, to talk a little bit more about your consulting and how you started the channel, things like that.
Absolutely. Well, what's interesting was I got involved in eBay, and I actually got very lucky because at that particular point in time, there were a lot of collecting categories that boomed in value. And some of these markets are very well known, like Beanie Babies really came out of the eBay era. It was the first major hot commodity that was sold on eBay at the time. As a matter of fact, eBay really benefited highly from the Beanie Baby bubble. So that was one of the collectibles that I got into. I got into also video games at this particular point in time. Now, you got to remember, this was back in the 1990s. So when we talk about vintage video games, really, we were talking about Atari, Intellivision, ColecoVision, because in 1995, the Nintendo Entertainment System came out in 1985. So it was only 10 years of age. So most people really didn't consider it truly vintage. So there was a massive speculative bubble opening up for a lot of Atari 2600 games. I mean, this was at a time, you can go to a flea market, you would find an Atari video game system with like 20 games. You would pay $10, $20 for it. You could flip it on eBay for 100, 120. And if you get any of the good games, the quote unquote rare or scarce titles, you could easily sell them individually. I mean, the market was going insane. So basically, I formed a business around this. I was still learning some of these other markets. I had my mentors in my grasp as well that were teaching me all this stuff. And what happened was I also did work jobs at this time too. I didn't just do, I want to make this clear. I didn't just do eBay full time. I did it full time, but I also worked full time. So I had other income coming in as well. I was learning all this. But what happened was I basically formed a business and I got very lucky and I rode the speculative wave of the video game market at that time. Right around 2003, 2004, people were losing interest in Atari. Atari, ColecoVision, and television, all that stuff was starting to drop in value because now Nintendo was picking up speed. Everybody knew Nintendo was going to be the next big thing. So right around the financial crisis, right around 2006, 2007, I had health issues, which obviously caused me to have, if you watch my channel, I have celiac disease. I can't eat gluten. I suffer from a myriad of autoimmune issues. So that was kind of where I was getting sick at this particular point in time. So I sold the business. I was able to sell the business and just get out of it. And at that particular point in time, I decided to go back, believe it or not, into corporate America. And I kind of forgot about a lot of this stuff. I still did it, but I completely put it to the sidelines and said, you know what? That was a fun part of my life. I know this knowledge. I love the antiques and collectibles trade, but I don't think I'm ever going to do anything like that again. Right. So as luck would have it, right around 2012, 2013, when I was officially diagnosed with celiac, I knew what I had. A little birdie came to me and said, Shawn, this publication, Antiques and Auction News, is looking for a published author, a columnist, to write for their publication. So they said, all you'd have to do is, I know that you're really into this stuff because at this time, I don't know if you guys remember this, eBay had this thing called eBay Guides. Were they allowed like just anybody to go and write a guide on any talking point? And I used to write these guides on like why you should avoid storage unit auctions, the truth about some of how these markets work, whether it was like Lego, whether it was antique glass. I used to just write all these guides. And people were reading them. And somebody, this is how this kind of played into it. Somebody said I should contact this publication. So I contacted the publication and I said, they're never going to want me, a pretty much nobody, to write for this publication. Well, I sent them some sample articles and they're like, wow, you write very concise and direct. You know what you're talking about. And before I knew it, they gave me a shot and I started writing for them. And I thought it would lead nowhere. And literally, this was back in 2013 when I started. It's now 2024. I'm still writing for the publication. So I want to say I did that for a couple of years. Then eBay, or not eBay, YouTube started to come on the scene big. And I remember there were certain YouTubers out there that knew of my work. I don't want to name direct names and put anybody on the spot. So I'm not going to do that because I've never done that before. So I do want to remain secrecy there. But there were some YouTubers that were blowing up, especially in the video game space, even in like the coin space. Markets that typically aren't talked about in YouTube that much, because we all know one thing that's great about YouTube. Everybody loves pop culture collectibles on YouTube. They don't talk too much about Tiffany glass on YouTube. Let's be real. Most of my videos where I talk about antiques and glass, they don't do that well. Full disclosure. So they started reaching out to me and they're like, you know, Shawn, you should transition to YouTube. This could really be something for you. And I said, I have no desire. I'm somebody, I just write articles. I'm just doing my own thing over here. And lo and behold, what happened was people found my articles and I had people reaching out to me through LinkedIn, through social media, and they would ask me, do you do consulting? You're so knowledgeable. I'll gladly pay you if you would analyze like the rare coin marketplace or the fine art marketplace. And the way I am, I have more of like an avoidant attachment style. So I just do my own thing and pretty much ignore everyone. I hate to say that, but it's just the way I am. So these people kept hounding me, and I'm like, is this a scam or something? I don't know what you want from me. So finally, this one guy really got direct with me, and he's like, dude, I will pay you right now $100 for a phone call. And I didn't think, I thought it was a scam. And I'm like, there's no way. So I challenged him on it. He paid me $100 and we had a phone call, and he's like, did you see how this could work for you? You helped me tremendously. And I'm just like, okay, I don't know. I've never been a consultant before. I don't know what to do here. So now flash forward, because this is about 2014, 2015. There was a person that came on YouTube that some of your audience might know, Rudy with Alpha Investments. He deals with Magic the Gathering collectible card games. And he started gaining popularity. And I noticed him right when he first premiered. I was one of his early subscribers. And a lot of people said, Shawn, now will you please come to YouTube? And I said, no, I'm not ready yet. So this was like 2016. So now I got back on the dating scene, and right around 2019, I entered into a relationship, and it ended fairly badly for me. And I was really hurt. And I was like trying to get over heartbreak. And finally, it just was the right time where I came down here to my basement office, turned on an iPhone. I don't know how to edit. I don't know how to do anything. I recorded a video, uploaded it to YouTube, and I waited, and I realized no one really watched it. So I figured, hey, great. No one's going to ridicule me, right? If I have nobody viewing the videos, I can't be ridiculed. So what am I afraid of? So then I slowly started uploading a couple of more. And lo and behold, it took a while, but it was mostly the Pokemon community and the graded vintage video game community were the first people to notice my videos. And they started going out and they started telling other people. And little by little, I developed the following. So now what happened basically within the last few years? Graded video games started to become a massive collectible. And I was always cautious about the market. So now Pat the NES Punk reaches out to me, who has like 250,000 subscribers. And he's like, Shawn, this is great. I like what you're doing here. You got to give me your take on this. So he pulls in another YouTuber by the name of Carl Jobst, who has like 600,000 subscribers. And they tell me, we want to put together a video and we want you to be part of it on graded video games. What's happening here so we can warn the community. Now, I honestly thought, I was a little bit naive. I said, okay, I'll do that, because in my mind, I thought, well, what's the video going to get? 50,000 views, maybe? Who's going to remember reserved investments from the video? I have like a 3-minute part in it, tops. So the video goes live, and before I know it, I'm pulled into the limelight. Everybody's reaching out to me. How did you know this? And now they're watching my channel because I've been talking about this consistently. So that's pretty much how I became active. It was all accident. It was never planned. Like, I get a little bit upset because people think that I planned this perfectly, that I would come on this scene and somehow I ended up with more than 10,000 subscribers and I did everything right. And it's like, no, I never wanted to be on YouTube. I just ended up here.
But Shawn, I think that is what makes your channel so great, is that there's no there's no bells and whistles. It's really straight information and a hard take and information that I think people need to hear, and that's what a lot of these guys out there, myself included, sometimes, it's all roses and, unicorn farts. And, it's not like that when you're really truly investing in this stuff as an asset diversification strategy, as an alternate investment piece to whatever you're invested in. So I love it. I think it's important. And so thank you for the background there. And so let's start big picture, if you don't mind, and then kind of whittle it down to maybe some of the collectibles that these guys like. And we won't talk too much on big picture, because every time I start talking big picture or economics, I used to be an investment banker. People don't care. But I do think it's important nowadays, with where the economy is. We just had inflation data that came out, and to me, we're in a weird spot. You kind of touched on this in your most recent video. We're in a weird spot, right? And maybe just talk more broadly about collectibles, where they are as a real true investable type high-end collectibles, where we are with that right now as it relates to where you can put your money elsewhere.
Sure. Well, let me speak about collectibles first. Because here's the thing that most people don't realize. Collectible finance has been around a while, but it really became a thing right around the 70s and 80s. That's when collectible finance really became a thing where a lot of people wanted to diversify in collectibles. Now, why was that? Because they saw what Wall Street was doing. And of course, Main Street wanted a part of what Wall Street was doing investment wise. And Wall Street was getting in with Reagan, trickle down economics, his tax plan. They were getting into wanting to invest in art, coins, all of this stuff, because the economy was in an expansionary period and they saw what the rich were doing. So that's really where this became a major asset class. Don't get me wrong. If you study the history of the antiques and collectibles trade, you're going to see that coins, all this stuff was popular back in the 40s and 50s. But people were not obsessed with investing in it like they were today. It was more seen, hey, you collect coins, great. Some of that stuff can go up in value. You collect stamps, great. That's a thing. Comic books really didn't become a thing until literally the 1970s. 1960s, 1970s is where that became a thing, because the first Overstreet guide wasn't published till 1970. So collectible finance is where we are right now. And I don't think that people understand the risk in these markets, because it was never designed to get to this point. And this is where, like, if you study the history of this stuff, going all the way back to the junk wax era of sports cards in the 80s, the speculative graded coin bubble also of the 80s, the fine art market that exploded out of the 80s, the 1990s antiques trade that exploded out of the 90s, none of those markets ever achieved the high prices that they hit back then, even to this point, even to this day and age. And people still argue that you can put all your money in these type of assets and you're going to be okay. It doesn't work like that. It was never meant to work like that. And a lot of the auction houses and the grading companies are to blame to a certain degree for putting this false idea in a lot of these collectors' heads. Because nostalgia is one of the most powerful drugs in the world. I used to have a mentor that used to tell me, if you can bottle and sell nostalgia, you will be one of the most richest individuals who ever existed. And now we do this. We have heritage auctions. We have Hakes auctions. We have Sotheby's and Christie's on the other end when we're talking fine art. And that's exactly what they do. They either sell nostalgia or history. It's one or the other. That's what you're getting drunk on. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are falling for the lies, because on YouTube, everybody's siloed. So they love Nintendo, or they love Star Wars, or they love Batman. Who do they tend to flock to? Other people that love Star Wars, Batman, and Nintendo. So everybody thinks, well, Super Mario Brothers is going to the moon because everybody I talk to loves Mario, and we collect the games. We get together online and we talk about this stuff. Therefore, that means everybody wants a piece of this. They don't understand the fragile nature that these markets rest upon. This is all based on the greater fool theory. That's pretty much what governs the entire antiques and collectibles trade. There's nothing real about these markets. It's all fugazi. It's if you buy an item for 10 grand and you're telling me you're buying it for investment, if you're going to hold that piece, whether it be 6 months or 6 years, you're hoping that somebody comes into the market and they want to pay more than 10 grand. If they don't, you just lost your proverbial arse, especially when you take in the factor opportunity costs, time value money, inflate, all that stuff. That's what makes these markets so inherently risky. And unfortunately, the ones that I worry about, it's the younger people. Those are the ones that typically I have to take by the hand and say, hey, there's nothing wrong if you want to diversify into these markets, but you have to be putting money away for retirement or saving for a house or even investing in whatever, like an S&P 500 index fund is what I recommend. And they don't want to hear that. They want to hear Pokemon cards, Bitcoin,
Right.
Whatever other collectibles that they like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on the Bitcoin bros. I mean, I've never understood it. I get so many comments on my channel like, why aren't you in Bitcoin? You invest in real estate, you got stocks, you got high-end comics. Why not Bitcoin? Because I don't understand it. I have no idea. And to your point, what are the underlying cash flows?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So.
And what's amazing too is some of these Bitcoin bros, they change the definitions of these terms to make it fit their own narrative. Like I get in debates with these individuals all the time and they're like, well, what are you talking about, Shawn? I can mine Bitcoin. That's an underlying cash flow. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way, because if Bitcoin loses interest, you're not going to be able to sell it. There is no money there. It doesn't create anything. It doesn't do anything. It's just like I used to get in this argument with gold bugs all the time. Now, again, you can diversify with gold if you want to, but you can't put all your money in gold. That's a bad investment, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I do get a lot of folks who reach out that say, hey, look, John, I'm thinking about buying 12 high grade 12 back Star Wars figures as an investment. What do you think about that? And the first thing I say is, don't do it. Don't do it. You know, to me, it makes zero sense. And, you know, look, I say this on my channel all the time. All the stuff behind me, if it goes to zero, that's fine. I don't particularly care. You know, it would be nice if I sold it for something, but to look at them as a purely investment perspective versus recollecting my childhood at 2024 prices, which is what I'm doing. You know, it's a totally different thing. And I do have a lot of folks that say, hey, this is going to be part of my 401k. And, you know, I'm thinking you really need to have assets that provide cash flow, like, you know, stocks or dividends or, you know, real estate, whatever it is, rental properties. So it's a big risk. And I think that one of the big things that I see that the collectors in my space, they see a never-ending appreciation rate for Star Wars. And I want to touch on Star Wars for a little while.
Yep, we can.
You know, what do you think the current state of the Star Wars as a brand is right now? It seems to me Disney has taken a lot of missteps.
Correct.
There's been a lot of misfires. Interest isn't where it was, and you're starting to see prices. While the heritage auctions that ended early today were completely insane prices, you know, for the most part, the very common stuff is dropping. Even the high-end, high-grade comic books are dropping. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts from a pop culture perspective. What do you think of the Star Wars brand today?
I think that Disney's making a lot of mistakes because they're trying to please everybody. And in doing that, they don't want to disappoint any of their fans, not realizing that's not the point of Star Wars. And I think that's why, like my opinion is, I was not a fan of the new trilogy. I think there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way. They feel a little bit let down. I did, however, like Rogue One. I will say I thought Rogue One was a good movie just because it was a more darker Star Wars film than what we're used to. And I thought that was cool. I thought that they got that a little bit. I'm not going to say that they hit it perfect, but it was well done in my opinion. So I will give them credit there.
Yeah, I agree. Andor, and I don't know if you watched the Andor series on Disney, but Andor and Rogue One were two bright spots, even parts of Mandalorian, I think. But, you know, I think the way I look at Star Wars is I have kids, right? They're 12, and they don't play with toys, right? They don't play with toys. They play video games. They got on their phone. They got, you know, Fortnite. And what do you think the risk is of the vintage Kenner Star Wars market as an, you know, a collectibles category going the way of Lionel trains, going the way of Western themed toys or the large GI Joes, things like that?
Oh, it's going to. And this is an argument that I get into with toy collectors because toy collectors tell me, Shawn, you don't understand. Toys are one of the biggest markets in the antiques and collectibles trade. It's true, but the problem is it's always changing. If we go back to like the 1970s and 80s when Star Wars came out, believe it or not, all the rage was tin toys from Japan from the 1950s and 60s, space robots and the like. Now today, some of that stuff is valuable, but if you chart the value of it, it actually, a lot of the common and mid-grade stuff dropped tremendously. It's only a couple of the rare pieces that are in like the top 5% of the market that continue to bang auction record after auction record, and very few people could have predicted that back then. So if you bought into that market, you were already buying when prices were escalated. So you did not make the gains that a lot of people claim they made. It's not like people were going to toy stores back in the day in the 50s and 60s and holding this stuff in mint condition. It didn't happen. So I honestly will say that my major concern is, yes, eventually there's going to be a dropping off of demand for a lot of these 80s toy properties. It's not just Star Wars. It's going to be He-Man, Masters of the Universe, G.I. Joe, Ninja Turtles, even Transformers. Now, I will tell you, out of all of those toy lines that I just mentioned, Star Wars is the strongest one. It has the most nostalgic pull because a lot of us that grew up with that, we remember going to Toys R Us, seeing all, I mean, it was massive. The displays, the figures, I mean, it was just incredible. And then you got that for Christmas. You went and saw the movies, and it just stays with you. I can't explain it. I'm high on nostalgia with that stuff.
Yeah, I thought I'd bring out, on that note, I think I'd bring out one of your recent pickups, which was a blue snags.
Yes.
And, the only reason I brought mine out is I'd like to hear, what did you just buy it for nostalgia reasons? Or do you think that something like a blue snaggletooth, it has good long-term appeal?
I got it for a good price, and I said, why not? That's really what happened. It was one of those offers that I put out in eBay that the person accepted that I didn't expect them to accept. So I said, you know what? I'll add it to the collection. I'll hold on to it. That's why. It was like, if I would sell it now, I could already make money. So it's one of those items that I bought at the right price where the profit margin was already there.
Well, I think one of the key points that you made in a recent video is like, hey, theoretical investor guy for collectibles, I want to get into Star Wars. And you mentioned that you thought the strongest markets would be high grade, fairly low population on the AFA report,
yes,
loose graded items, or proof cards. And I've just maybe touch on that a little bit.
I gladly will. If you look at the risk of holding any of the factory sealed cards, there's too much risk there. Same thing with the play sets. The card, the bubble's yellow. If they use tape, the tape dries out, as you're probably aware if you own any of this stuff. If it's a white figure, I hate to say this, it's going to discolor.
That's right.
If you even have a play set that's graded by AFA, that tape is very fragile. I've seen it come undone even without any damage to the AFA case. So that's what I usually tell people, is avoid that stuff. And of course, they don't want to listen, because that's where the majority of the market is, right? They want to believe that that's the good stuff. But I have clients that went through this, where they have a collection worth $100,000. They put it away. They lock it in storage or a room. They come back to it. Now it's like, well, the grading label says it's an AFA 85, but the tape dried up. Or the figure, the action figure that was holding the weapon now dropped to the bottom of the bubble. What do I do, Shawn? And I'm like, well, if you send this to an auction company, they're going to look at it and they're going to have to denote that in the auction. They're going to have to claim it was graded by AFA 85, but here's the present condition. And they're going to show pictures. You're not going to get top dollar for it.
I know what was crazy about the Heritage. I don't know if you've even looked at them yet, but the Heritage had an auction lot today that ended today. They had a 21 back AFA 95 mint on card Boba Fett, and the weapon had come out of his hand, which automatically, if you had submitted that today, there's no way it gets the 95. The weapon was hanging off behind his head. Still sold for like $84,000. And to me, I see it time and again on Hakes. There was a labeled AFA 85 Rain Corps Keeper mint on card, where the blister was labeled clear blister, but it was clearly yellowed since grading. We're talking $150 to $250. I mean, it sold for $3,800. And what I had mentioned on my channel is, Heritage, they bring in the big bucks, right? They bring in the whales that maybe where price is price is not an issue. And you find constant examples on the upper end and on the lower end where you have a head scratcher, as you talked in your video today. And it was just wild to me to see some of the prices that Heritage got today, where I'm like, good luck getting the money back on that.
Yeah, it's insane.
There was a rocket firing Boba Fett prototype that sold today. That was one of two hand painted that sold after the buyer's premium for $525,000. And that's FU money, right? They're not worried about the resale value of that. And as you talked about with your Action Comics #1, right? Think about the underlying cash flows that you can get just parking it in a CD.
Yep.
So to me, it's a pretty incredible thing to see the upper end of the market really hold up like that. How long do you think the Star Wars the vintage Kenner Star Wars toy market has before we start seeing our generation die off and that glut of supply starting to hit the market? I mean, do we have 20 years? Do we have 10?
I'm thinking 20 years. Because I can tell you right now, younger generations are not going to react the same way to this stuff that we do.
No.
And when we look at the later toy lines, like the Power of the Force 2, Shadows of the Empire, the prequels, all of that stuff was so overproduced and hoarded. It's pretty much, for the most part, I hate to say this, worthless. I'm sure that you would agree, with few exceptions.
Yep. Yeah, and you know, even the vintage Kenner line. I mean, during the heyday of Kenner's popularity, I mean, they were running, you know, between 10 and 17 million figures a year. Now, a lot of those were opened, but you know, I do think that there is inherent risk for a lot of my viewers who are amassing these big collections, very similar to what I have behind me, but even on a broader scale, that the timing, I think, is very important if you're depending on those big piles of collectibles to be worth something someday. So I think it's just an important point that I wanted to touch on. Let's also talk about, now that AFA has their, and even CGC, they have, you know, population reports. AFA brought their population reports back. CGC obviously has had their census counts. Talk a little bit about condition dependent rarity, which is another theme, and you know, the optimal investment grade for some of these collectibles.
Well, there's three types of rarity that make up the antiques and collectibles trade. There's absolute rarity, which is the best by far. That's like an Action Comics 1, because let's be realistic. Back in 1938, when that comic book was published, nobody was saving them. Nobody was speculating on them. It just so happened over time, people looked back and said, oh, that's the first appearance of Superman. It's a key comic. Everybody wants it. So nobody saved it. So it's very rare in the marketplace. So that has absolute rarity. That's an example of something with absolute rarity. Then you also have condition rarity. This is an item like a giant size X-Men 1, to use this as comic books, where pretty much
I'll bring one out for you just to show and tell here.
Okay, 9.4.
Now I'm not going to go 9.8. I'm not going to go 9.8 on you.
You shouldn't go 9.8 on that.
You know, 9.4 is about as high as I can go on that one, you know.
Correct. And this is where the optimal collecting grade plays into this, because a lot of people will argue with me, well, Shawn, my giant size X-Men 1 is now 50 years old. It's really rare. It's scarce. And I tell people, have you checked the population reports? That is not the definition of a rare or even scarce item. It's nowhere near. A Batman 227 is much more scarcer than a giant size X-Men 1.
Now let me stop you right there. Okay. Sure. So now we're gonna do a comparison here. So I did bring out my GSX 194 white pages. Now, obviously, this was more expensive than my Batman 227 92. But for those watching my channel, I do have some that watch my channel and look at comics as another collectible category to invest in. And I felt really smart for all of, and I'm going to pull another one up here real quick before we really dig into the question. I'm going to pull up this one. This is my Batman. Now, I bought this, and then lo and behold, about 2 or 3 days later, your video pops up showing your Batman 232. Now, you got a 9.6 with white pages. I felt really smart for all of 5 seconds before I went back to my intense self-loathing that I usually do. But, I saw this. I was like, wow, Shawn bought that too. So I felt really good about that. And so, I want to touch on, we have books like this, and we have giant size X-Men.
Yes.
And I think people need to have a hard look at their own collections and say, what's really collectible, and what's the optimal grade range, and what's really rare, So I'd like to hear more about that.
Yep. This is the mistake that everybody makes. Everybody goes and thinks that the highest condition copy you can find is the best investment. And I proved this during the pandemic that is not the case, because people were paying like $130,000 for an Incredible Hulk 181 in 9.8 condition. Today, you go on Heritage, you can get the book for about $75,000. And even in my opinion, it's overpriced at $75,000 for a 9.8 copy. And there's people that will fight me to the death on that. Shawn, you don't know what you're talking about. It's the first appearance of Wolverine. Everybody loves Wolverine. Even kids growing up today, they know who Wolverine is. They're all going to want that book. Well, if you look at the CGC census, there's, I think, 145, 146 copies of that book in 9.8 condition. So this is how you analyze the optimal collecting grade. And it's much easier, I want to be very clear here, to do it for already established third-party graded collectibles. So coins, sports cards to a certain degree, and also comic books. Can be a little bit tricky to do it with the AFA grading scale. It can be done for toys. And it can also be a little bit tricky to do it for a lot of the newer graded speculative collectibles, like graded video games and even Pokemon cards, because some of that stuff hasn't had time to ferment on the open market, meaning it just started to be graded and it shot up in value. So when we look at a comic book, like I'll use Incredible Hulk 181 as an example here. A 9.8 we know right now goes for $75,000. I would have to look this up directly to get accurate numbers, but let's say a 9.6 goes for
18.
30.
I think it was 18. The last one I saw somewhere in there.
We'll use that as an example. And let's say that a 9.4 goes for 10 and a 9.2 goes for 7.5. We'll just use that for talking points here. Sure. This can be any book. The optimal collecting grade, the book that you want to get, is the one before the price jumps exponentially. That's the secret to collecting this stuff from an investment standpoint. And a lot of people don't know this. And I hate to say this, I make a lot of money off the Timmys, Kimmies, and Poindexters that don't know this. Because if I had a 9.8 Incredible Hulk 181, I would gladly sell it at the peak of the market. I would take that money. I would buy a 9.2 or a 9.4, and I would invest the rest in something else.
And it's a much safer use of your money, parking that in CDs where you're also getting underlying cash flow for that difference of that delta in price. And I've taken that to heart with a lot of the books that I've gotten from the Silver Age, Bronze Age, things like that. So it's good advice that I think can even apply, like you said, to AFA graded collectibles. Yeah. The AFA 95 Boba Fett that sold today for $84,000, or you can get an AFA 80 that is, let's call that $9,000 to $10,000. It's a very similar type of calculation, I think. So I think that's really helpful. While we're on the subject of comics, and we got maybe a few more minutes. I don't want to take too much of your time, but this is really, really great information that I think hopefully will open up the eyes to some folks as they're looking at their room of $100,000 of Star Wars only collectibles. And do you have, from your consulting experience or just being in the collectibles and antiques space, do you have horror stories for folks that were fully invested in XYZ category that market collapsed, and kind of some of the real life stories like that? I don't know if you have anything like that at all.
Oh, absolutely. I could tell you the story, one that came out of the financial crisis with the rise of Pawn Stars and American Pickers. Vintage advertising started skyrocketing. So right around, American Pickers hit the scene around 2010, 2011. So right around 2013, there was a massive speculative bubble opening up for a lot of this vintage advertising, because it was.
You mean like the big gas signs that they always have in the show?
Coca-Cola. Okay. I've shown some on my channel from time to time, but yeah, Coca-Cola, ExxonMobil, the wonderful mobile Pegasus sign, even John Deere, all this stuff. People were going hardcore. And there were people going to auctions, and they were like paying a premium for this stuff. And I had a guy that contacted me, and he said, Shawn, I have $250,000 worth of vintage advertising. And I said, it's great. How long have you been collecting? 2 years. You bought all of that within a 2-year span. And we had a consult. And literally, if he would have consigned that to auction, he didn't. He chose to hold on to it. He would have lost like $100,000 into the market at that point, because the market turned. Because a lot of this stuff is not as hard to find as people make it out to be. It's just auction companies are smart in the way they market this, the way they promote it, and the way that they time their auction. The auction company is designed from a psychological perspective to suck as much money from you as humanly possible, because they have a fiduciary responsibility with the consignor. They don't have a fiduciary responsibility to the buyer. The buyer's just sitting on the other end of the screen, clicking the bid button. He doesn't even, I hate to say this, I don't mean to insult anybody, but most people don't even understand bid increments in auctions, meaning they don't understand the psychology behind it as to why the number jumps up the way it does and why certain people will place a bid at a set particular point in time. You can make a lot of money if you understand that. And you can also bid people up. You can be, I hate to use this word, you could be the asshole if you want it to be once you own that. And that's probably what happened with some of these auctions that ended in this Star Wars auction today. Because I saw the prices and my jaw dropped. I would never pay those prices.
No.
That's why I tell people, you know, you watch Storage Wars, you watch some of these shows, and it's not real life. Some of these people walk in, oh, I'm going to get it at any price. I'm just going to keep bidding it higher until it's mine. That's a good way to go bankrupt. That's not a way to invest in antiques and collectibles. That's why it's reality TV. It's not real. It's
do you feel like heritage, and I don't want to, I'm not, this is certainly not an attack on any of the auction houses, so I want to say that first. But when I look at the prices at heritage for today, for example, or even some of the auctions at Hakes for a lot of this stuff, it's almost like the type of buyer that that really focuses on those auctions. It's where money doesn't even play a factor. And it's oil barons in Saudi Arabia that just want to get the item at any price. And it's almost like the true collector is pushed out. And I don't know, it just seems that
you're 100% true, because I can tell you this firsthand. It is ultra wealthy people. And on the other end, there are people that do that, but what they're doing is they have so much money exposed to this stuff. They're trying to, how do I want to say this? They're trying to dollar cost average it out. So if they make a mistake in one auction, maybe another auction, they do better. So if they would ever sell their holdings, they're hoping to at least break even, make a little bit more on it. But it's next to impossible with some of the prices they're paying, because I worked with some of these individuals. It's amazing. Like, I can tell you this firsthand. There's a lot of trust fund babies in this market. People don't realize that. There's a lot of, I'm just going to use this term, there's a lot of quirky people that come into money and they spend it on antiques and collectibles. It's just something that they do. I mean, even Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was a very famous artist. He owned a brownstone in New York that was packed 3 floors with antiques and collectibles. He just went to auction after auction and bidded on this stuff. He was a hoarder. People didn't realize it.
I don't know anything about hoarding. I should have used a fake background, but I do. I got a little hoarding going on myself. But maybe on that note, do you think what are the strategies I always talk about when looking at Hakes, for example, with Star Wars items? Look at the AFA 80s. Look at the ones with price stickers in the upper corner, or ones that are punched versus unpunched. The items that are not the AFA 90s. The items that are going to be the sole focus of those trust fund babies, of those quirky individuals. Look at the next tier down. And the only times I've ever had success on heritage or on Hakes are that second tier of items that are still nice collectibles. Don't get me wrong. I just got a Hulk 181 in a CGC 85 with white pages. Fair price. Well, it was probably about 10% below, the last sale. I was okay with that. And if it goes up, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But I've always had success at that kind of second tier type of item and not focus on the big boy items.
Do you know why? Because collectors have it in their head that near mint is the standard. So that's why most pieces that are under near mint minus, they will sometimes sell for a discount. You can do well in that market. It's mainly monopolized by collectors as a result.
Yeah. I thought that was I just found it to be interesting how, like you said, today's numbers were pretty jaw-dropping. Do you think that the upper end of the collecting market, like we saw today, or like we see a lot in Hakes, the very upper end of the market, like today's stuff, even in the current high inflation environment, is it just recession proof? I mean, to a certain extent, I know it's come down, certain things have come down, but those prices today, I think, demonstrate that there's people out there that are not affected by recession, and they have to have the highest of the rarest of the rare at any cost. And I just was curious as to whether you see that with maybe some of the individuals you work with.
I do, unfortunately, and this is where we get into a discussion about wealth inequality, because I don't think that the have-nots understand how the haves live, and vice versa. There's an empathy gap there. And I think that's also what's contributing to this. There are wealthy individuals where it doesn't faze them. You know, even me, I use this as an example. If I go and I buy my favorite tea, I'm not going to go to Walmart or Target and get mad because it's 70 cents higher. I don't care. If I want the tea, I'm going to buy it, take it home and drink it. I got other things to do with my time and money than worry about paying an extra 70 cents on tea. But I get it. If you're economically disadvantaged, that 70 cents may mean a lot to you. So that's where I think we have this dichotomy, if I can use that term, between what's happening in the overall economy with differing groups, different mentalities. And also, I hate to say this, it also comes back to how people were taught about money, their education in finance, economics, and the like.
Yeah, yeah, those are. I think that's kind of where I am too with it. I guess before we wrap up, I wanted to maybe ask you. Now we're talking to hardcore Star Wars collectors that watch my channel, right? And for those individuals that maybe have a really high dollar volume in terms of what they have in their collection, what is your advice in terms of what to target if you're truly going to invest in this stuff? What to target, and some of the mistakes that they should try to avoid?
Absolutely. Now, are you looking at this from the standpoint of people that are coming into the market investing now, or are you looking at this from the standpoint of people that want to disinvest from some of their holdings?
Yeah, I think both. I mean, I've got a lot of people that are fairly new into Star Wars vintage stuff that have put a lot of money into it, let's say over the last 3 to 5 years, versus maybe folks like me that have been doing it for 10 or 15 or whatever. But I just think it would be helpful to maybe just to talk about some of the red flags, to keep an eye out for. And when your collecting portfolio has overtaken maybe where you really should be putting some of your money.
Well, that's usually what I start with. If you don't have a substantial net worth, or I should say, even if you're not investing regularly in an investment portfolio, you have debt, you should not be putting any money in collectibles. I'm sorry. And people don't want to hear that, especially people in the Pokemon community, people in a lot of these pop culture collecting communities. They get mad at me. They call me an elitist. They swear at me. This is where I get death threats. This is where the whole 9 yards. I have people that hunt me down on social media and they scream at me. But it's the honest truth. I'm not trying to be mean, but everything is relative, right? If you're worth $1 million, I'm just going to use this as an example. If you add up all your assets, the equity you have in your house, your 401k, brokerage accounts, collectibles, anything, and you have a net worth of $1 million, and you tell me, Shawn, I want to diversify further in the collectibles, and you tell me you're thinking of spending $10,000 on one item, well, that's only 1% of your entire net worth. That's not going to hurt you. If you're, however, somebody that has a net worth only of $50,000 and you're thinking of putting $10,000 into these items, now you're at 20% of your entire net worth. It makes no sense to put that in one item. And then if something happens to it, meaning you don't understand that you have to maintain it, you have to insure it, you have to make sure that it does stay in the condition that it's at. And if you go to sell it, you're going to incur massive fees because it's not free to sell through an auction. And again, while you're holding it, you get no cash flows, you get no interest, you get no dividends. Is that really, that's usually the questions that I ask. Is it really worth that to you? If it is, then go and do it. I mean, I'll be honest. I have 20 to 30% of my net worth tied up in antiques and collectibles. But the other 60, it's in real estate and it's in investments, primarily index funds and the like. So I'm okay. It's not hurting me. Plus, I know how these markets work. I can pretty much sell into the hype. I can make my money back if I need it to. Other people aren't so lucky. And that's why I tell them it all starts with caution and it all understands the risk. You have to understand the risk to get into this. And vintage toys, unfortunately, are inherently more fragile than comic books, coins, currency, and Pokemon cards. It's just one of those things where these items were never meant to be stored unopened for 40 plus years. We're in uncharted waters here. There's nothing else we can even compare this to because action figures that were produced in the 3 3/4 inch size back in the 1970s were brand new to the market back then, especially even producing them on a backing card with a plastic bubble with glue.
Right.
So it's completely, we don't know how this stuff is going to age as we go further out. We just don't know the risks.
Yeah, these are all really great points. And again, to my viewers, I'm not crapping on you collecting Star Wars. Obviously, I do it too. Collect what you love, all that. I'm talking to the investors out there, the quote unquote investors who are thinking that this is going to be their 401k. It's very risky. It's just something that I've harped on in the past, that, you know, collecting as collectibles as an investment category are inherently risky. There's a lot of ways to mess it up. I want to touch one final thing on comic books before we wrap things up, if you don't mind.
Sure. I gotta say one thing though. I actually have
good.
people that come to me because I store a lot of my high-end collectibles in safety deposit boxes, and they can't handle that. They come to me and they're like, well, Shawn, I would be going to visit the safety deposit box every week to make sure they're okay. And I say, if that's you, you're putting too much into collectibles. You have to be, collectibles should be an asset class where if you lose everything, you're still sitting pretty. You're fine. If it would go to zero. Now, most likely these items aren't going to go. You're going to get something for them. It may not be where you're making a profit, but you will get something for them. But if you are ever putting too much into an alternate asset class like this, where you are constantly concerned with it, you're nervous, you feel you have to keep checking on it, it's too much for your budget, for your net worth, for what your peace of mind is worth. That's usually what I tell people.
That's a great way to finish things off on that, because, I mean, one of my buddies is like, so you keep your comic book collection in a closet in a dark room and you never pull it out? I'm like, I pull it out occasionally, but it's not like I have to look at it all the time. These CGC cases are not exactly UV resistant, so I don't have a big wall of CGC items, you know. But I love that. So on to one final question on comic books.
Absolutely.
You know, we talked a little bit about GSX-1. We talked about Batman 227. I want to talk about nostalgia collecting for Copper Age books like Batman. You know, this has got Batman 423, right?
Yep.
And this is an example of a splurge on an item where I don't expect it to ever be worth more than what I paid for it. And in fact, it'll probably go down in value, right? Copper Age books, modern comics, versus maybe some safer options like Golden Age and Silver Age. If you could just maybe touch on that.
I usually tell people, if you're investing in books that were printed after 1975, there is an inherent risk there, because that's when people started really hoarding and speculating on comic books big time. If you look at the population reports, everybody loves Amazing Spider-Man 300, right? Go look how many copies exist in 9.8 condition. I remember when that book hit like $10,000 during the pandemic, I was pleading with people, sell it into the market, get rid of it. I assure you, 5 years from now, you will be able to buy it back at a cheaper price and you will be thanking me. And there were people that were attacking me online. It's Venom. It's the first appearance of Venom. You don't know what you're talking about. This book's going to keep going up. I'm like, look at the CGC census. It makes no sense.
Well, Shawn, it's funny you bring up ASM 300, because, you know, that's a book that I want to get. And again, it's for nostalgia reasons. It's not necessarily for investing, but it's one I'd like to get in a 9.8, admittedly, which is the exact opposite of any kind of investment strategy, right? Correct. And I was like, well, if it gets down to $3,000 again, I'll get it. Well, if it gets down to, you know, and it keeps going down. It keeps going down and down and down. So I've held off buying it, and it ended up being the right decision. But like you said, $10,000 during the pandemic, and you know, my mind is blown. You know,
it's insane. And that's the problem. Now, there are a few exceptions here, right? If you have a copy of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the original first printing, that's a blue chip bona fide key from that era, the Copper Age. So that would be something where if you told me, Shawn, I'm thinking of putting my money into this, okay, let's talk about that. That could be, if it's something you're interested in, okay, we could see that over the next 10, 15, 20 years if you want to do that. But most of these other books, there's too many of them out there. And furthermore, you pretty much have to get them in 9.8 because of how many were hoarded. When you look at the population reports, you can see how quickly it fills up. Because remember, we had the massive speculative bubble that premiered in modern era comic books back right around the late 80s, early 1990s, which a lot of this stuff was hoarded.
Yeah, and, you know, if you look at what CGC is doing now with their kind of with their push to have more 9.9s on the census, and you look at like
Yep.
Wolverine Limited Series #1, someone came out with a video and said there's been 10 new 9.9s in the last month and a half. And, you know, so there's a lot of folks that are, you know, are taking advantage of this new, they're probably buying a bunch of 9.8s, which you can get for cheap. And there's 1,000 of them on the census, or if not 2,000, sending them back in to get a 9.9. And now the 9.9 market is, you know, insane. You know, why would you buy a 9.9 comic for some of these Copper Age or even Bronze Age books where they're freshly graded at 9.9 and pay 20x what a 9.8 goes for, when there's 10 new ones on the census in the last month and a half? Just an inherently risky strategy versus maybe something like the Batman 227 that you hinted at, where it's conditionally rare. So,
and you know why grading companies do that? It's all about money.
oh
They
yeah,
have to either change a standard or they have to do something because they want all that stuff that's graded. If it's not coming back to get graded again, they're going to eventually run out of stuff to grade. In all honesty,
the Wall Streetification, having Blackstone, you know, be the new owner, they've got to figure out some new revenue streams, right?
Absolutely. It's just like in coins. I remember when they initiated plus grading, and now, of course, AFA did it. A lot of these companies followed suit. But it's like, this is ridiculous. Is it a 64 or 65? No, it's a 64 plus. It's strong for the grade. And if you look, people pay an immense premium for that little plus sign. I mean, it's like insane.
It's the same thing in the action figure world. Well, I have taken up an hour of your time tonight, and I hope that you guys that are watching this, again, I'm not trying to tell you not to enjoy your collecting, but do it wisely and maybe replay some of the key points that Shawn shared here. And more importantly, go to his channel and subscribe if you have not, because a lot of his broader themes can apply to whatever you're collecting, whether it's comic books, coins, you know, action figures, and maybe try to apply some of that and use your money a little more wisely. So I just want to say thank you, Shawn, for joining me tonight. This has been an absolute pleasure. And I appreciate you taking the time for such a small channel like mine. And it's just been an absolute pleasure.
No, I really enjoyed it. Absolutely. And I should say also, I'm not against collecting. I'm not even against investing in this stuff, as long as you do so rationally and wisely. It's when you get caught up in the hype, the nostalgia, when you watch a lot of the hype-driven YouTube channels that really get into this, you can really get sucked in. And I'll tell you, I'm a consultant in the trade. I see people go bankrupt and get divorced over antiques and collectibles. It is not a fun scenario to be in. Just use caution.
Well, on that note, my wife and I celebrate 22 years tomorrow.
Congratulations.
And one of the key things I told a recent viewer who just got married, I said, I'm going to help you to get to 22 years of marriage. Have separate bank accounts. Yes. So when you buy that Hulk 181 on Heritage, she's not going to know about it. So,
and the same thing too. If she goes and buys an Hermes Birkin bag, you don't know about it either.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Well, thank you again, Shawn. I really appreciate it. This has been awesome. And thank you all very much for watching today.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out anytime.
All right.
Thanks.